Pleasure.
So, appealing this decision on what grounds?
Major ground in terms of some of the technical issues that we believe that the Commission should have taken into account about whether or not they had jurisdiction to consider the issue in the first instance. So,
so did they have the jurisdiction to consider
this is the issue we've got. There was a number of arguments made as to whether or not other proceedings before other courts should be taken into account before they could make a decision. And as such, the Commission decided to go ahead. We believe that there are grounds to argue that that should not have proceeded until those...
So in essence, you're saying that the Fair Work Commission should have waited for matters before other courts relating to union officials?
That is correct, yes.
Right.
So we will see what happens. We've asked for an expedited hearing and a stay in the application for the amalgamation to proceed at the end of the month.
The Deputy President of the Fair Work Commission in this approval that was given this week for the merger did criticise the behaviour of union officials, particularly at the CFMEU, made that quite clear. But I thought he also said that can't stop the merger.
No, it can't, but there are some technical avenues that we believe that could be pursued. We'll continue that. But he is right in that in terms of determining whether or not the amalgamation should continue, he can't take into account their bad behaviour. He can't take into account the fact that there are still, there's massive amounts of penalties against them, and he can't take into account the public, what is in the public's interest. So there were very limited issues that he could take into account in terms of this amalgamation, but we believe there are some technical grounds that we can pursue.
I'm still confused about what those technical grounds might be.
There's some issues around whether or not some proceedings before other courts needed to be determined before...
But if they go to bad union behaviour, does that change anything?
It's an issue about whether or not matters on contempt charges could be considered as issues that the Commission needed to take into account. But there's some confusing legal argument as to whether or not those issues were appropriately taken into account by the Commission. So there are technical arguments that we believe we will pursue, and the appeal was lodged this afternoon.
So this is an appeal to the full bench of the Fair Work Commission. If you have no luck there, how far are you willing to go with this?
Well, we will do what we think is right in our members' interests. There are obviously issues that we will consider when we have a decision by the full bench.
So if it doesn't go your way, though, Federal Court next stop, would you go all the way to the High Court?
We'll obviously look at all those opportunities, but no stone will be unturned as far as our members' interests are concerned.
When you get to the nub of this, what's the concern for employers, for the master builders in your case, about what this union will be able to do when it's merged, as opposed to what the two unions can do at the moment?
Well, obviously there are issues around what is in the economy's interest and the public's interest. We have two unions that are more than happy to breach laws consistently around this country. What will they then do with the might and the power of joining together and having control over an entire supply chain from port to site?
So, but their argument on that is there are already secondary boycott provisions, which means you can't simply shut down a port over a dispute at the mine.
That is true technically, but obviously as one union, as opposed to two separate legal entities, it does make those arguments more difficult. But also we need to also take into account that they therefore have more assets behind them, they've got more people behind them. And what are they therefore going to do with those assets and those people in terms of continuing to breach laws? We don't have a problem with mergers per se. It is just there's not been adequate tests to consider what is in the public interest in this case.
But it's essentially an argument, what it is, too many members and too much money. Because there are still bigger unions. The Shoppies is a bigger union than this merged super union would be.
Shoppies generally don't breach the law, and they're not thugs, and they don't have, you know, significant breaches and significant numbers of judgments against them that say that they continue to breach the law and disregard laws of this country. We say that is a significant issue that should have been taken into account, and the Commission couldn't take that into account.
Do you feel the government's done enough to help this cause of yours?
We've certainly said we've been disappointed that the government didn't get the legislation on a public interest test through last year. We obviously recognise the context of the political environment at the end of last year, and it did get lost in other debates. But more could have been done, and we'll continue our lobbying efforts.
Now, on another matter, you've also issued this statement today on International Women's Day about the need to get more women into the building and construction industry. What needs to happen to get more women in?
Well, first of all, we've got women that don't actually understand what opportunities there are. They don't understand that we're more than welcome and willing to accept women into the industry. We've only got 11% of our workforce are women. Only 1% of our trade workforce are women.
1%?
1%.
Wow.
And yet we're one of the highest paying industries in Australia. So we believe there are huge opportunities. We've got double-digit employment growth forecast over the next 5 years, as well as people leaving the industry. We need to fill those shortages. So there are significant opportunities, but women really aren't aware of the breadth of opportunities in the sector. We're doing a lot of work at the moment to change that perception, and we've also last week started a mentoring program as well. So we're very excited about the Women Building Australia initiative, and on International Women's Day, very much trying to encourage women to look at our industry as a career opportunity.
I mean, the numbers you cite there are pretty staggering, perhaps not surprising. It's been, typically, traditionally a bloke's area. Is there a gender pay gap, though, between the women who are in the industry and the men? Not
that I'm aware of. I haven't seen that. I mean, generally we are higher paying, and generally, from my understanding, there is not gender pay.
It's just getting more women in.
It's getting more women in.
And we saw the Prime Minister today announce a STEM ambassador who's going to go help encourage girls school by school to take up science and maths, and that's great. But do we need something similar here to get women into construction and building? We absolutely do. With a growing sector and huge opportunities, we believe that we need an ambassador, but to some degree that's our responsibility as an industry. We need to highlight the benefits we have as an industry to encourage more women to look at us as a serious career opportunity. Is it also, just finally, too blokey a culture on building sites? I mean, you talked about the thuggishness of the CFMEU and so on. Is that a deterrent at the end of the day? It is. And so the work that we've got to do is not only about encouraging women, but it's also helping work sites change culture as well. We know that it is happening, but maybe it needs to happen a bit faster. Denita Wawn, Head of the Master Builders Association, good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us. My pleasure.